Today's daf, we're going to be learning a Sanhedrin daf Yud. Today's daf is sponsored by Mindy and Eric Hecht in loving memory of Dr. Charles Feldman Zichrono Livracha. He would have loved to have been part of this learning community and is surely looking down on his many family members who learn the daf with much pride. He is missed every day. Today's daf is sponsored by Naomi Oxman in loving memory of her mother, Sarah Babala Younger, on her 6th yahrzeit. We miss you much. Think of you and Dad every day. Today's daf is sponsored by the Hadran women of Long Island for the refuah shleima of our friend and co-learner Ricky Zibit, who's recovering from surgery. We daven that you will continue to recuperate, be able to use your new knee to dance at many smachot. Today's daf is sponsored by Vicky Harari in loving memory of her mother, Tzipora Bar Rachel. Her persistence, inner strength, resilience, and eternal optimism inspire me daily. Okay, we're going to get started with our daf. A reminder about the Zoom that there's no Zoom on Sunday, Monday, but the classes will be up as usual. They'll be up even earlier by 5 in the morning Israel time, so you can get ahead and learn a little earlier, and back to regular Zoom on Tuesday. Okay, we're going to get started with Amar Rava at the bottom of Tet Amud Bet. Right, the very bottom of Tet Amud Bet. So we started at the end of yesterday's daf. Rav Yosef talked about two different things, and today we're going to come back to those two different things, which is one is Kim Le B'Derabamine, which is if someone's supposed to get two punishments, they always get the harsher one and not the less harsh one. So if it's death and money, we're going to actually just give you the death penalty and you won't pay the money. However, there's an exception to the rule, which if it's mamon lezeh v'tashlum nifashot lezeh. If the death penalty relates to one person and the monetary payment relates to somebody else, then actually you can get both punishments. And we're going to talk about another case of that today. Then Rabbi Yosef went into this issue of if you come and testify, and in that testimony, you say about one thing that incriminates yourself, and in that same statement, you've incriminated somebody else as well, like Ploni Riva Olon Lirtzono, then Rabbi Yosef says you turned yourself into a rasha. You can self-incriminate. You turn yourself into a rasha. At that point, we don't believe your testimony, so we don't believe what you said about someone else, and they don't get punished. Rava disagreed and said two things really that sort of work together, which is Adam Karov Etzel Atzmo. You can't testify against yourself. We said, what about the fact that admission in court is acceptable? Well, admissions are accepted for monetary issues, not for punishment issues. So you can't incriminate yourself, which means that when you said something bad about yourself, we don't accept. You're not going to turn yourself into a bad person and come to court and testify, I need to get punished. So therefore, we don't believe you regarding yourself. However, we do what's called pagin and dibur. We split your words and we accept what you said about someone else, just not about yourself. Because if we don't accept your testimony about yourself, then you're not considered a rasha, and then you can testify. And then we keep this other part of what you said about someone else. And now we're going to bring another example of it. So Amar Rava. Ploni ba'alishti, if you say so-and-so have relations with my wife, he, together with another witness, can be two witnesses to basically cause the death of this person who committed adultery with the person's wife. But not to kill her. Now, the Gemara says, meaning he's not believed about his wife. Why? Because he's related to her, right? He can't testify against his wife. Well, we're going to talk about this. So first the Gemara says, my kamash malan, dimefalgina dibure, if the whole point is to say we split the person's words, we don't accept the part about his wife, but we do accept the part about the other person, right? The adulterer. So it's the exact same thing. We split the words. Ein adam ne'aman right? Adam karov etzel atzmo, adam karov etzel ishto. It's the same idea, and he's not going to turn his wife into a bad person. So, right, you have to think about the case. I mean, the case is his wife cheated on him, right? You wonder. On the other hand, you could just hate his wife and want to lie about her, like we don't know. So basically we say, what's the new? What are we learning here? What's new? So Ma'u de Tema, you might have thought, and here we're going to explain it in two different ways because I think it's interesting, and this is a good example of you could just read this simply and kind of think you know what they're getting at, but there's actually two different opinions about what this Hava Amina is. The Hava Amina is what the Gemara thinks. And that's what they're going to say. You might have thought, which in the end they're going to say no. Why do you need two cases? Because if we didn't have two cases, you might have thought that in the case of the wife, Adam karov etzel atzmo amrinan, aval ishto lo amrinan. You might have thought a person is related, right, is karov etzel atzmo. Now, karov is a word that really relates to all relatives, right? But there's clearly something unique here about not self-incriminating, which is to yourself, not to your spouse. So you might have thought maybe your spouse is not like yourself in this issue. And therefore, Kamash Malan, that it is. Now, what would it mean if your spouse is not like yourself? So where would that take you? And here we're going to go with Rashi, who gives one approach, and the Ravid and the Ran and others who give a different approach here. There's even a third approach, probably going to stick with two. So Rashi says, what would we have thought then? Let's play it out. So we're going to play it out. According to two different commentaries, it's going to go in a totally different direction. You might have thought, Ishto lo amrinan, Adam karov le'inyan palginin dibure. This whole thing of palginin dibure, which is you're not self-incriminating. It's not exactly the same thing as relatives, which aren't accepted, because we're only talking about a person and a person to one's spouse, not a person to the brother, father, mother, all those relatives. So they say this, what? Ho'ilu meheman ahu dibur lemiktale l'chavre liktale nami ledida. Rashi says, maybe you'll say that we don't have the same concept of in Adam karov etzalatzmo, and we never say something bad about himself. Maybe he would say something bad about his wife, and therefore we might say the following. Since the man is believed about the first part, about the other person, maybe we'll just believe the person across the board here, and we will convict the wife and kill her. Kamash malan, no. The fact is, and then on what basis? Well, you could call it ishto kagufo, which is, right, it actually comes up in Hanukkah candles. Right? Many people do light the husband and the wife, but theoretically you don't really have to because ishto kagufo were considered like one unit, a husband and wife. And for this purpose also. In the end, no. The same way you won't self-incriminate, you won't incriminate your wife in court or your husband in court, and therefore we're going to consider it as if you testified about yourself. And therefore we're going to do what Rava says, Pagina Dibura. So the Havamina, what you might have thought, according to Rashi, is you might have thought he could, right? He'll be believed for the whole thing. The other option is obviously going to say you might have thought, because in the end, remember, what's the answer? We split it. We don't believe about the wife. We do believe about the other person. So either we're going to say you might have thought we believe you about the whole thing. And the other approach is going to say we might have thought we don't believe you about anything. Because what? Because it just goes into the regular category of krovim. Now, what do we know about krovim? You can't testify about any relative. So the other approach is to say here that you might have thought, since she's your relative, you can't testify about her. And since you're testifying about her and someone else, well, we don't accept the testimony about her. We won't accept it about anybody else as well. And maybe we just ignore everything you said here. And by the way, it makes sense if you think about the situation. He thinks his wife is cheating, so he testifies. He could be lying, right? He's just trying to get her because he's angry with her. And, but he's not believed because he's obviously, as we call nogea b'davar, right? It's his wife and he's her, very closely related to her and angry at her. And, he just might not be believed at all. And maybe we don't believe everything he said. So those are the two havaminas, as we say, and it's two different approaches how to read those words of the Gemara, which kind of seems simple, but you see, it's not really clear what, the Gemara brought up this theoretical, you might have thought as if it was obvious what you would have thought, but the commentaries struggled to figure out what actually you would have thought, that means we believe the whole thing or we believe nothing. In the end, we believe half, we split it, because it's no different. Ve'amar Rava, another case. Ploni ba'al na'ara murasa b'huzamu. If witnesses come and said that so-and-so, a specific person, had relations with a betrothed young girl, young nara, like an in-between stage, she's not too young, but she's not yet a bogeret, which means she's in the domain of her father. What does this mean? Well, yesterday we talked about a case where there was the couple was married, right? The motzi shemra. Now we're talking about a case where she's betrothed. Now, when she's betrothed, her ktuba goes to her father. So if you remember, there's two issues with this naram or having relations with a man. Number one, we're going to say that she gets the death penalty. Number two, she should lose her ktuba, but she's only betrothed at this point. Now, when she's betrothed, who owns the ktuba? Actually, the ktuba money goes to the father. If she's a naran, she's not a bogeret. This is like she's 12 and 6, at 12 with 2 simanim, like 2 pubic hairs, and for the next 6 months, she's called a nara. Before that, she's a ketana. For 6 months, she's called a nara. Then she becomes a bogeret. Once she's a bogeret, the money goes to her. But we want to find a case where the money goes to the father. You'll see why in a minute. So the first case, someone comes to court, 2 witnesses, and they say, so-and-so, they have a name, have relations with a na'ara muasa. We don't know who she is. Okay, he didn't know her name. He couldn't testify about her, but he knew she was betrothed. I don't know how he knew she was betrothed. If he didn't know who, they didn't testify who she was. Maybe they just didn't know to identify, what her name is. I don't know. But since he doesn't have, the witnesses don't have a particular person, okay, this is going to be a very important thing. They're not causing, so what are they causing in this case? Because in the end, they're going to be huzamu, which means they're going to be edim zomimim. And the punishment for edim zomimim is whatever they tried to do, that's what we're going to do to them. So we have to figure out, what did they try to do? Well, basically, all they tried to do was kill this one man, because the Naram Murasa wasn't going to lose her k'tuba. Her father wasn't going to lose the k'tuba because they didn't specify a particular person. So there was no loss of money here. And therefore, Neharagin ve'emashamim mamon. So therefore, they get killed if the edim were zomimim. They tried to kill this person. Because they tried to kill the person, they get the punishment. Well, right when they lied, they get the punishment of death, but they don't have to pay any money. However, if they say bito shel ploni v'uzamu, if they say this man slept with the following man's daughter, who was an aram murasa, and then they became edim zomimim, neheragin u'mishalmim mamon. They both get killed. Okay, those two witnesses get killed, and they have to pay money to the father of the woman, right, of this nara. Why is that? Don't we say kim le b'deravamine? They should only get the death penalty. Well, it's another case of, and this is where we're going back to this. Rava is saying, just like Rav Yosef, even though they disagreed about Pagin and Dibure, Rava agrees with him about this, mamon lezeh unifashot lezeh, because the money goes to the father, and the death penalty is because of what the witnesses said about the woman and about the man. So there's three different people here, but the death relates to two of the people, and the money relates to somebody else, even though it's because of the Nara Murasa, but it goes to her father, it doesn't go to her, and therefore we're going to split, and they're going to have to actually get both penalties. Ve'amar Rava, and we're going to have an exact parallel case here. Ploni Rava hashul v'huzamu. If a person engaged in sexual relations with an animal, called bestiality, this is also punishable by death. Both the person gets killed and the animal gets killed. So if somebody comes to court and says, two witnesses, so-and-so have relations with an ox, without specifying whose ox. Now, in that case, we're not going to kill any shore because it wasn't clear which ox it was. Vihuzamu, and they were edim zomimim, neheragim ve'emashamim mamon. So they didn't cause any loss to the owner of the ox because there was no owner of the ox that they specified. So they just get killed because they were trying to kill somebody else by saying he had engaged in sexual relations with this animal. So they tried to kill him, they get killed. But if they say, just like the previous case, shorosh ploni vuzamu, they said so-and-so engaged in bestiality with the ox of so-and-so, then they were huzmamu neharaginu mishamim mamon. Why is that? Because mamon lezeh unifashot lezeh. Because for one person, they were causing a financial loss. For the other person, they would have caused him to get killed. So again, we have a split. So now, obviously, the Gemara is going to ask the same question we asked in the previous case, which is, hatu lama li hainu hach. Why is Rava giving two cases of the exact same thing? Well, really, he didn't need to bring both cases, but he brought the second case to lead us to a third case, which he had a question about. So it was a lead-in. In other words, he started with case one with the Nara Murasa. Then he moved to the shore, and this is going to be the link between the Mamon Lezeh and Nefashot Lezeh and Palgin and Dibure, because he talked about this case of the shore in terms of the Palgin and Dibure, in terms of the Mamon Lezeh and Nefashot Lezeh, the Kim Lebi Derabimine issue, and the fact that we have an exception here because death is relating to one person and the financial payment is relating to someone else. But what he really wanted by bringing the shore case was to lead us to another question. Now, when the Pagina Dibure case, we had Adam karov etzel atzmo. Then we said he's also karov etzel ishto, right? Ishto kagufo. Him and his wife are like one and the same. So whatever's true for him about himself will be true for him about his wife. Now we ask a following question. Debai Rava. Ploni Rava Shori. Okay, this is a takeoff on the previous case. What if you say, this man engaged in bestiality with my ox? Now, that's going to cause, what's going to cause, right? And then Huzamu, right? Mahu. Oh, sorry. No, this isn't Huzamu. This is just, if I say that statement, am I believed? Because what am I doing? I'm incriminating my ox, which, okay, we might say, okay, well, you're not karov to your ox, really. But what does it mean? It means it affects you directly. It means they're going to kill your ox if they take your testimony. So mahu, mi amrinan, adam karov etzel atzmo ve'ein adam karov etzel mamono. we believe you, right? We don't believe you about yourself because you wouldn't self-incriminate, but you might actually cause yourself a financial loss. Now, remember, we said, you can have an admission in court that relates to dine mamonot, right? And say, I owe someone money. So maybe, right, we would say the same thing here. You can incriminate your ox and get your ox killed, even though it's going to cause a financial loss to you. Oh, Dilma, or perhaps Amrina Nadam Karovet Samamono, or maybe we say, and we're going to talk about this topic later also when we get to the topic of a thief coming into your house and you go and you kill the thief and was, like was the thief coming to kill and was it self-defense, and very fascinating topic. We're going to also come back to this issue. How strongly do people feel about their money? Okay, this is always a question that comes up, right? Some people are very, right? If you take away their money, it's more serious, right? We're going to talk about this in a few different contexts in our Masechet. So maybe we say, you're also, just like you wouldn't self-incriminate to give yourself lashes or something, or get yourself the death penalty, you also wouldn't self-incriminate to get your ox killed. It's your money. You care so much about your money. So after he asked this question, Batar Abaye, after he asked it, Hadar Pasha, he answered his own question, Adam karovet alatzmo ve'ein Adam karovet samamono. We don't view it the same way, the way you feel about your money, and therefore, you might actually, we'll believe the whole thing of what you said. We're not going to say pagini diburu, we don't believe you and your ox doesn't get killed, but we will kill the person who engaged in bestiality. No, we're going to kill the person and we're going to kill your ox, and we assume you were telling the truth, and we can accept that kind of testimony. Okay, that's the end of that sugya with, again, those two sugyot of both the exception of the rule to kimle b'derabba mineh of mamon lezeh and fashot lezeh, and the pagin and dibure, the splitting up of your words. Again, that was a machloka between Rav Yosef and Rava, whether we split or don't split. On the mamon lezeh and fashot lezeh, they didn't disagree. Rava and Rav Yosef both just brought cases of it, okay, different cases. But on the issue of pagin and dibure, they have a big disagreement. Now we're moving back to the Mishnah. Makot bishlosha. So we have a machloket in the Mishnah, if you remember. Dine malkot. When there's lashes, which is a most lota says in the Torah, negative commandments, you get lashes for. So when you get lashes, is it in front of a court of 3 or a court of 23? So we have a machloket. So the first opinion is makot bishlosha. What's the source in the Torah? We're going to try to find a source for 3 and a source for 23. Amar Rav Huna Amar Kra Ushfatum Shnayim. So now we're going to read some psukim in Sefer Dvarim, chapter 25, verses 1 to 3. And these are psukim we're going to darshan. These are the psukim that talk about lashes in the Torah. Ki hiye ben anashim, when there's a fight between people, v'nikshu al mishpat, and they go to the judge or the court. Ushfatum, they judge them. That's what they're going to say. Judge them in plural, which means 2 people. V'tzdiku et tzaddik, and they say the person who's right is the one who becomes exempt or, comes out clean. V'yeshiu et harasha, and they incriminate the evil person. V'hayan bin akot harasha, and then when they go to hit the rasha, here's lashes. V'pilo hashofet v'kal lefanav kader v'shato b'mispar. He puts him down on the floor. He hits him. Okay, according to how bad he did things with a number. It's a very weird language, but the next pasuk really explains what that means. Arba'im yakenu lo yosif. We hit him 40 times, no more, which they actually mean to say 39. It means 1 less than 40. Pen, because it says pen yosif lakotol ela. We don't want you to do any more than that. Makaraba, a big hit. And then you'll really hurt your brother in front of your eyes, right? We don't want to cause the death of this person, and we want to protect them. So not any more than that. Okay, so now we say the following. So makot b'shlosha, we get it from ushfatum. Shnayim, vein beitin shakum mosifim aleim orachai. Right? You can't have an odd number, so we're going to add an even number, so we're going to add 1 more. That's how we get to 3. Now the Gemara asks, wait a minute. If you're going to learn from the pasuk, and because there's a verb and it's in plural, that means 2. Well, elameata. Well, according to that, v'tzdiku shnayim v'yeshiu shnayim. Well, that's also plural, and that's also plural. The next 2 verbs in the pasuk. So you should then get to harekan shiva. You should get to 6, and then add 1 more, so it won't be even, and you should get to 7. To which they're going to explain, and this is going to be the whole next section, is all just what we need. We're going to need it for something else, which means it's not free to darshan, which is why we only got to 3 here. So now we're going to go off topic because we're going to explain. Here's a drashan v'tzdiku and b'hirshiu, and we're going to realize even though it seemed like a pretty simple pasuk, it's actually super complicated to understand, which is kind of similar to what I said earlier in the daf. Just like you might have thought Adam karov etzel atzmo, maybe not ishto, and then what does that mean then, right? It wasn't so clear. So here also, we're going to read it at first. You think you know what it means, and then you're going to realize it's a bit of a complicated pasuk. So hahume ba'ile lechidula. He needs it stick when you're shiur for something else, for a drasha of ula. Damar ula. Ula says, remez leidim zamimim min haTorah minayin. Where do we have an allusion, a hint to teaching us about edim zomimim in the Torah? So the Gemara says, what? Remez leidim zamimim? Baktiv kasher samam. Here, why are we looking for some remez, like an allusion, a hint to edim zomimim, when it's written explicitly in the Torah? It says kasher zamam, right? It says, right, when this happens, right, it doesn't exactly explain exactly the whole thing of edim zomimim, but it says, right, if you lie falsely, then vasitam lo kasher zamam, you're going to get the punishment that you tried to do to others. That's what we've been talking about. It's obvious. Ela remez leidim zamimim shelokim minayin. His question must have been a little different. Now, the first sugya when we get to makot is going to be, which is all about lashes, or at least the beginning part is about lashes, is and edim zamimim is. There's some exceptions to the rule. Normally, the punishment is kasher zamam lasol achid, but sometimes you can't do that. Like, for example, the first case is you testify about someone that they're the son of a kohen and a divorcee, and they're therefore a halal and not a kosher kohen. Okay, well, how do you do kasher zamam? What if I'm not a kohen? Right? So it's not going to. I'm going to be called a halal. Like, that's irrelevant. Okay, so sometimes there's a bunch of exceptions that you're going to get lashes for. That's what they're looking for. Where can you find a case in the Torah, like an allusion to this halacha, that sometimes edim zomim, when you can't do kasher zamam, you get lashes? Dichtiv v'tzdiku tatzadik v'yeshiva tarasha. Okay, how do we get that from these words? And that's basically the answer to our question. We're not going to use hitzdiku in your shiur to teach you another two judges, another 4 altogether, because we need this for the following drasha to teach you that edim zomim sometimes get lashes. Now we're in the psukim. Notice about lashes. We're not in the psukim about edim zomimim. So we have to somehow get from here to edim zomimim. So now the Gemara says, well, let's explain what the problem in this pasuk is. Mishum di'tzdiku tatzadik v'yeshiva tarasha v'hayan bin hakot harasha. Okay. What does the pasuk say? Let's try to read it and explain. It says when there's a fight between two people, they go to a judge. Now, a fight between two people is usually monetary. And then it says, right, it's tzdiku tatzadik, yeshiva tarasha, right? One was right, one was wrong. Okay, and they made the one right, and the one wrong, right? He was guilty. And then it says, and then when we hit the bad person, now, what do you mean? When we made the good person good and the bad person bad, what we meant is you have to pay money to the other one. We don't get lashes for that. So what could this possibly mean? So they have to say this pasuk doesn't mean what you thought it meant. Ela, it must be a more complicated case. And what must it be? A case of edim zomimim. Edim shehirshiu et hatzadik. Okay, now, what does it mean it's diku et hatzadik? It's diku et hatzadik doesn't mean we thought it meant, which is the judges decided the one who is right is right and the one who was wrong is wrong. No, it's first witnesses came and hirshiu et hatzadik. In other words, there's something missing in this pasuk. The first stage was false witnesses came, and they said that the person who was right was actually wrong. They were the bad person. And then, what does it mean, hitzdiku et hatzadik? They fixed the wrong that was done, meaning, ate ede achrine v'tzdiku et hatzadik to me'ikara. V'shavinu lahanach rasha'im. Now, who's the tzaddik and who's the rasha? Basically, we have edim zomim that came and said you did something that you should have, you did something wrong. Then, and you were really right, but they said you did something bad, not a monetary thing. They said you did something wrong. It wasn't like two people were necessarily. Then what happened? 2 witnesses came and said, those witnesses couldn't have said that. They were with us on this day, and they can't possibly have said that. Then what happens? Those second group of witnesses basically turned you back into a tzaddik, okay, justified that you were right. And then at the same time, they were also hirshiu tarasha. So it's tzdiku tzaddik hirshiu tarasha is not the judges, it's the edim hamizimim, the ones who turn them into edim zomimim. By doing that, they basically put everything back the way it was supposed to be. Edim are bad, the edim zomimim are bad, and the original litigant is good. And then what happens? We have edim zomimim. How did they get punished? Next pasuk. Okay, next pasuk tells you they're going to get lashes, and there you have it. That's edim remez edim zomimim that get lashes from the Torah. So now the Gemara says that was very complicated. Why couldn't we have just done it much simpler? V'tepuk lo ta'aneh. Couldn't you just say? There's a pasuk that says lo ta'aneh b'reach hayit shaker. Don't lie falsely in court. That's what edim zomimim did. It's a lo ta'aseh. What do we know about lo ta'aseh? You get lashes for them. Well, there's an obvious answer there, and this is something that we're going to see a lot, especially in Makot, but also in Sanhedrin. Mishum dehavele lav she'ein bo maaseh. V'kol lav she'ein bo maaseh ein lo kina lav. There's a basic law that in a lo taseh, where there's an action associated with it, you get lashes. But if there's no action associated, which would be testifying. Testifying is not an action, even though you might say it's an action. It's just speaking. You're not doing anything. So something by speech, a lo taseh that's associated with speech alone or no action, you don't get lashes for. And that's why you can't learn it from lo tanet, and that's why we had to get it from this very complicated way. But that was all to say, hitzdiku in your shiur, can't be adding another 2 judges, get us back to 3 judges only from the word shvatum. Now we're moving to Rabbi Yishmael, who says, Be'eslim b'shlosha. My time at Rabbi Yishmael, I'm Abaye. Ati rasha michai ve'mitod. He says, well, we're going to do a gezeira shava here. Gezeira shava, it says rasha by lashes, and it says rasha by murder, by someone who gets capital punishment. How is that? K'tiv hacha vayam binakot rasha. That's what we just saw. That's lashes. That's in Bamidbar 35 when it talks about the Rotzeach, the one who murders intentionally and the one who murders unintentionally with the Ir Miklat. There it talks about don't take kofer, lenefesh Rotzeach. If someone murders, don't allow them to pay their way out. Asher hu rasha lamut. He's an evil person and deserves to die and therefore gets capital punishment. So Rasha appears there, Mal halam b'eslim v'shlosha, af kam b'eslim v'shlosha. So according to Abaye, simple gezeira shava from Onesh Mavet. Rava doesn't have the gezeira shava. If you remember, gezeira shavas are always passed down from their rabbis. Maybe didn't have a tradition about that gezeira shava. So he says, Malko b'mkom mita omedet. This is a fascinating topic. He says, you're really deserving of death, but we're not going to give you death. Anyone who does a negative transgression in the Torah is deserving of death. But we're not going to kill everybody, right, who does a transgression. So we're going to reserve it for where, there's really clear death penalty, and it says mot yumat in the Torah. There we'll give out capital punishment, but we're not going to do it for lashes. For all the lo tasehs in the Torah, we'll just give you lashes instead. But what it's really saying is you deserve to die, but we're going to lighten your punishment. And that's why any case of lashes is judged in a court of 23, because it's really a dinei nefashot case. Well, the Gemara is going to have some issues with this. The Gemara is going to say, kind of an interesting discussion, it sounds a little cruel, okay, you're going to think, but because it kind of makes light of life, but I want to remind you, this is all just questions. This isn't really true. They're just kind of raising a difficulty with this theory, okay? It's just a theoretical discussion. Rav Acha de Rava says to Rav Ashi, Ihacha umdina lamali. He says, wait a minute. There's a rule about lashes. Now, if you're going to say lashes really means you're supposed to die, but we're going to give you lashes instead, then what's the point of doing an umdina? What's an umdina? We said you get 39 lashes. If you remember in the pasuk, right, we said we don't want the person to die. That's why we're going to do 39, no more. You can't add any more, right? It's almost like saying don't get carried away, right? When you're whipping someone, you can see you just kind of get carried away. You're in the moment and you just keep going. No, you can't do any more. But not only can you not do any more, before someone would get lashes, they would assess. And they would do a big assessment. How many lashes can this person handle? Now, the point is, we want to make sure, right? L'machaye. What's the umdana lavali? Why do we do umdana? L'machaye, to make sure the person lives. But imayit limut. If they die, they die. Who cares? Now, right? That's what I'm saying. They make light of life. But why do we say who cares? Because anyway, they were deserving of death. So why do we have to go so far to prevent that person from dying from the lashes? If anyway, again, it's just a theoretical discussion. But if anyway, they're really deserving of death, so why are we going far out of our way to assess and give them less lashes when if they die, because anyway, they were deserving of death. So Amar Le, Amar Kra, he says, well, Rav Ashi answers, look, I'm going to learn it from the pasuk. Now, you're going to see the way this goes. He's going to learn it from the pasuk, then they're going to continue to ask, and then he's going to learn it from the same pasuk, but a bit of a different way. You can see that Rav Ashi clearly knew that this isn't the case. And clearly we do umdina. We don't want you to die from lashes, and he's just trying to kind of find it in the psukim. Okay, that's clearly what's going on here. So Amar Kra v'nikla achicha leinecha. That end of that pasuk that we said about the lashes is right. Your brother will be hit in front of your eyes. Now the way they learn this is ki machit agaba dechayim machit. It says nikla achicha leinecha. Now, he's your brother. If he's your brother, that means he has to still be alive. So when you're hitting him, he has to be your brother, which is still in front of you, le'inecha, in front of your eyes, which means he has to be alive. And that's why we do this assessment, because even though you might say theoretically they're deserving of death, but this pasuk says, right, we want the brother to be in front of your eyes. We don't want the person to die while you're giving them lashes. So now they say, well, still have a little problem with that drasha, because Elahadatanya, it says in a Braita, amduhu lekabel isri. Let's say they assess this person, they can only handle 20 lashes. Ein makinato ela makot haruyot lishtalesh. It has to be a number divisible by 3, okay? Because they would do 2 behind and 1 in front. The way there was like a way of doing, it was a set of 3 lashes. So if it's 20, what would you do? Well, tamahen timne srei, you would do 18. 18 is divisible by 3, turning out I'm a bet. But if you have to hit them while they're still alive, then theoretically, you should hit them 21. Don't go down and do only 18. Go up and do 1 more. Why 1 more? Well, if the person's what does it mean you can handle 20? It means you can't handle 21. But when you hit them, the 21st one, they'll still be alive. And if they die after that, who cares? Because well, you hit them, they were still your brother. The fact that they died after, we don't care. Why don't we care? Because they deserve the death penalty anyway. So if you're going to say they deserve the death penalty anyway, but we have niklachi chaleinecha, you're still fulfilling niklachi chaleinecha if you give them 21. Because as you're hitting them, they're still alive. So what if they die after? Again, they're making light of life, and they don't really mean this. This is just a theoretical question to get to kind of finding the answer. So Amar Le, Rav Ashi says, fine, I'll switch my drasha. Amar Krav niklachi chaleinecha. Notice the words of the pasuk. Nikla is the hitting. Then it says achicha leinecha, your brother in your eyes. You need to be having a brother after you hit them. In other words, that's the whole point. The person stay alive even when you're done, not when you're hitting them, but after. And that's based on the order of the pasuk, v'leika, and you won't have that if you do 21, because the person will be dead by the time you finish, and therefore we're not gonna allow you to do the 21. And that's why basically we say, even though lashes are in place of death, we have a different pasuk which teaches us that, but we're not supposed to kill you. We're not supposed to let the lashes kill you. And that's why we have umdina. Okay, moving on to the next topic. Ibur, so that was all about makot b'shlosha or b'esrim b'shlosha, and what's the source for each one. And for esrim, right, for shlosha, we saw shvatum. For esrim b'shlosha, we saw 2 opinions, either rasha, or really lashes are in place of death. And that's a really interesting topic. Obviously, the Tanakama Rabbi Meir says 3 doesn't think that makot is in place of death because it's done in a court of 3. But Rabbi Yishmael, perhaps, depending on whether you take Abaye's stance or Rava's stance, thinks that lashes is really in place of death, which is a very interesting theory to think about. Ibur hachodesh b'shlosha. We're now up to ibur hachodesh, and from there we're going to get to ibur shana. Okay, the Mishna said ibur hachodesh. Let's just go back for 1 minute and set up the what we're going to get to. So it says ibur hachodesh, which we're going to have to explain what it means. We don't know yet. Ibur hachodesh b'shlosha and ibur hashana b'shlosha. Derives Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says ibur shana b'shlosha. Rabban Shimon Gamliel says b'shlosha matchilim b'chamisha nosim v'notim v'gorim b'shiva. Rabban Shimon Gamliel is a strange position for ibur shana, which we're not up to yet, but we're going to get there soon. You start with 3, you deal with it, like discuss it with 5, and then you finish it with 7. We're going to have to understand what that is. So first we're starting with ibur hachodesh. So ibur hachodesh means, literally, ibur, like a pregnant woman, is an isha me'uberet. So, or in a leap year, it's a shana me'uberet. Ibur is when you add an extra. So what does it mean, ibur chodesh? It means the Rosh Chodesh can be either on the 30th of the month or the 31st. So if you right, and then they would have witnesses come and they would determine if the new moon was seen the first night. If it was, then on the 30th, they would declare it already Rosh Chodesh. If they didn't see the new moon on the 30th, then they would declare Rosh Chodesh on the 31st. And that would be a Chodesh Me'uberet, because the month was longer. It was 30 days rather than 29 days. Okay, the month that they're ending. That's called Ibur Chodesh. So now it says Chishuv lo katane, Kiddush lo katane, ele ibur. It doesn't say calculating whether or not to do a 30, right, to have this 30-month 30-day month as opposed to 29. And it doesn't say kiddush, like determining when it's going to be. It says ibur. But that doesn't make so much sense because why should that be done in front of 3? Lo likdashe umimela liabel. Theoretically, if you don't declare the new moon on day 30, meaning it's a 29-day month, then by default, it's going to be on day 31 because it's either one or the other. And once you pass day 30, right, day 31 is automatically going to be Rosh Chodesh. So why do you need to decide that in front of 3? So something doesn't make sense about the wording here. So Abaye changes the wording. We're going to have 4 interpretations of this Mishnah and what they're talking about. Amar Abaye, Tnei Kiddush hachodesh. Abaye says the ceremony, when we say this day is Rosh Chodesh, whether it's on the 30th day, whether it's on the 31st day, that's what you need 3 for, not ibur, specifically when it's a 31-day month, just when a 30-day month and you're going to do it on the 31st day. No, just in general, Kiddush HaChodesh, whether you do it on day 30 or you do it on 31, either which way, when the Beit Din declares today is Rosh Chodesh, that's done in front of 3. Tanya Namihav, here's a brighter to support Abaye's reading. Kiddush HaChodesh v'ibur Shana b'shlosha. Divrei Rabbi Meir. Okay, here the brighter says the Kiddush HaChodesh, not ibur, okay, and the ibur Shana, which is irrelevant right now, but that's b'shlosha. I'm a Rava, v'ha'ibur katani. Rava doesn't like this answer because it says ibur. So you could say it's kiddush, but that's not what it says. Ela I'm a Rava, kiddush b'yom ibur b'shlosha, achar ibur leka kiddush. He says, if you do the kiddush on the day of the ibur, what's the day of the ibur? This is confusing. It's the 30th day, the day that could have been the last day of the previous month and would have made it a chodesh ibur. Well, if you determine that day is Rosh Chodesh, meaning the 30th day, meaning it's only a 29-day month, which is actually then it's not going to be an ibur chodesh. It like comes out the opposite. But if you do it on the day of the ibur, then you do it with 3. Achar ibur leka kiddush. But if you do it on day 31, you don't need a ceremony in front of 3. Why not? Well, mane, this matches. And each time someone's going to bring an opinion and a morat, then they're going to connect it to some Tanaitic opinion. Like Abaye had that brighta that supported it. This is going to be, who does he hold like? Rabbi Elazar ben Sadoki ditnan. Rabbi Elazar ben Sadok omer, im lo nira'a bizmano, em kachinoto shekfar kitshuhu bashamayim. What does this mean? If they didn't see the new moon, again, witnesses would come on the night of after day 29, basically that night of 30, witnesses would look, do you see the new moon? People would come forward to the court. If they determined that day was Rosh Chodesh, that's when we do it in front of 3. That was the ceremony to say today is Rosh Chodesh. But if not, it's automatically the next day. So you don't need to be done in front of 3, like we said before. So therefore, only what we're talking about is Kiddush on the day of Ibur, and that's why they called it Ibur. So he agrees with Abaye that it's Kiddush, but only if the Kiddush is done on day 30 and not if the Kiddush is done also on day 31. Rav Nachman Amar, Kiddush achar Ibur b'shlosha, b'yom Ibur leka Kiddush. Rav Nachman says the opposite. Rav Nachman says, it's only Kiddush, now it says Ibur. So he says, it's Kiddush on the day that the 31st day. And that's when you're going to do the month and make it a chodesh me'ubal. You're going to make it a 30-day month by saying Rosh Chodesh is actually only on the 31st day. Then you're going to do that with 3 people. But biyom ibur leka kiddush, but on the day that you said, Rava, if they decide on the 30th day to make a Rosh Chodesh, you don't need kiddush. Okay? You don't need a ceremony in front of 3. Umane, who is this? Right? He says the exact opposite of Rava. Palemo, he detanya palemo omer. He's also a Tana. Bizmano emakachinoto, shelo bizmano makachinoto. Okay, we don't know why he says this, but he basically says when it sounds like what he's saying is the natural time for Rosh Chodesh is really day 1, the 30th day. So when you don't do it in its natural day and you need to push it off, we're going to basically say that you need a ceremony. So on the natural day, we don't need the ceremony. It doesn't need to be done b'fnei shlosha because that's the natural day. Again, it's a bit of a question, what's natural, what's not natural. But we're going to say, yeah, really months should be 29 days, but sometimes we have to add another day. So the base, even by calling it an ibur, it means we're adding to it, right? Like a leap year is not natural, right? A leap year is an extra, we add. So likewise, the months should be 29 days, but sometimes you need to add another day. So when you need to add that other day, then you need a ceremony. Okay, now we're going to have Rav Ashi, 4th interpretation. Rav Ashi Amar Olam Chishuv Katani. We're not talking about the ceremony of declaring it Rosh Chodesh has to be done in front of 3. Okay, which then, is it on the day of the ibur? Is it not on the day of the ibur? Is it both? Okay, those were our 3 interpretations. He said we're talking about figuring it out. When the witnesses come forward and we question them and we figure out, did you really see the new moon or not? And sometimes, there's also an issue they have to calculate because you can't have too many months that are X number of days. There's like a certain number of days a year where you can, a certain number of months where you can have 29 days and 30 days months. So that's what we're talking about. It has to be done in front of 3. Umay ibur. So why does it say ibur if it means chishuv, thinking, calculating? Well, it's chishuv, the ibur. It's calculating whether or not the month should be a 30-day month. Va'adid kabay lemitne ibur shana. Tananami ibur hachodesh. Why they call it ibur? Well, because it was put up in the Mishna next to ibur shana. Since they call that ibur shana, they call this ibur chodesh, even though they really should have called it chishuv ibur. Okay. And mane, So chishuv chodesh in, kiddush chodesh lo. Okay, but it really means chidush. It doesn't mean kiddush. So he goes against all 3 opinions. Mane, who is this according to? Again, we're going to bring a Tannaitic source. Rabbi Eliezer, he did Tanya. Rabbi Eliezer, Omer, bein bismano, bein shalo bismano, ema kachinoto. There's no ceremony where you need it in front of 3 people to be sanctified the month. No. How do we know this? According to Rabbi Eliezer, anyway. Other people obviously thought yes, right? Again, we saw either you do kiddush both, no matter what the month is, or you do kiddush only if it's a 29-day month, or you only do kiddush if it's a 30-day month. So we had all the possibilities. He says you don't do any of those. Where do we learn it from? It says in the Torah, you're supposed to sanctify the Jubilee year, which sounds like you only sanctify years and you don't sanctify months. And from there, he thinks that there is no ceremony of Kiddush HaChodesh. That was the whole issue of ibur Chodesh. Now we're getting to ibur Shana and the strange opinion of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. Tanya, Ketzad amar Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel b'shlosha matchilin u'b'chamisha nafsim v'notnim v'gomrim b'shiva. Now we're going to bring a Braita. It might even be a Tosefta. I can't remember. But they basically want to go into detail here about Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel's opinion. So it starts off this Braita with, you start with 3, just like our Mishna. You have a diyun, a discussion with 5, and then you finish it off with 7. So how does this work? And then we're going to find out what's the source, and that's where we're going to end today. So first they bring 3, and they say, do we need to talk about adding another month or not? So if 1 says yes, and 2 say no, so we go by majority, and then we end it right there. And we don't even bother having a discussion, because 2 of them say, we don't need to it, batil yachi b'miuto. So the 1 is canceled out. This sounds to me like we don't want to waste people's time. So we first start with 3. We basically say, what do you guys think? Do we need to start dealing with it? If 2 people say, yeah, we need to start dealing with it, which is the next case, so if 2 out of the 3 say we should start dealing with it, then they bring another 2 for the diyun, for the conversation, the deliberations. And they deliberate with 5. So now again, we're going to get to a crossroads. After they have the deliberations, they now have to decide yes or no. So how do we decide? By majority. So 2 decide after the deliberations we need to do a leap year, and 3 decide we don't need to do a leap year. Okay, so 2 get canceled by the majority. Okay, and then we stop. But then if 3 decide yes and 2 decide no, we go by majority, yes, but we need to bring another 2 because you have to finalize it with 7. So now where do we get these 3, 5, and 7 numbers in the Torah? We're going to have 2 options. Pligi bar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nachmani v'chad imei umanu Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi v'amr la Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi v'chad imei umanu Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nachmani. This is just a way of saying 2 people. We know who the 2 people are. It's just one of them with someone else, and who is the someone else? The other person, or the other one with someone else, and who is the other one? The first person we mentioned. So it doesn't really matter. In the end, it's these 2 rabbis. And Chadamar keneged berkat kohanim. If you know berkat kohanim, the first pasuk is 3. Yirech Hashem Yishmerecha. The next pasuk has 5 words, and the third pasuk has 7 words. So there we have 3, 5, 7, and this 3, 5, 7 is keneged the berkat kohanim. Chadamar shlosha keneged shomrei asaf. Okay, there's 3 people who are watching the threshold, watching the door. There were 5 who were the Ro'ei Pnei HaMelech, which is like the king's main people, or the 7 Ro'ei Pnei HaMelech. Where is this from? Rashi says that one of them is from Achashverosh, but Tosfot disagrees and quotes Rabbeinu Tam as saying, no, they're all from when it talks about the destruction of the temple. Tzidkiyahu goes to Galut at the very end of Sefer Melachim and Sefer Yirmiyahu. Both describe it, and these psukim come from both those places. They talk about 3 Shomrei Asaf and 5 Ro'ei Pnei HaMelech in Melachim. And in Yirmiyahu, it talks in the exact same description. The parallel, it says there were 7 Ro'ei Pnei HaMelech. So from there, we have 3, 5, and 7 of prominent people. This actually fits a little better because it's judges, right? It's important people that left. And that's why we have the 3, 5, and 7. So here we're going to end with an interesting place. Amar Abaye Rav Yosef. Oh, sorry, I skipped one line. Tani Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef brings a braita that supports the second position. Hani shlosha v'chamisha v'shiv'a, shlosha keneged shomrei asaf, chamisha ro'ei pnei hamelech, shiva ro'ei pnei hamelech. He says the exact same thing as the last interpretation. And he brings it from a braita. So Amar Abaye Rav Yosef. Ada ina, my time alo parish lamar hachi. Until now, why didn't you tell me this braita? Like I've been waiting all my life to hear this. Why didn't you bring this to me? Why didn't you tell me? Amar le, lo v'yadana ditzrachitu. I didn't know you didn't know it. Like I didn't know you needed it. Mi ba'itu minai milta below amrilachu. Did you ever ask me something that I didn't answer? Like, why are you blaming me that I didn't tell you? This sounds like my kids, right? They'll say, well, you never taught me that. I don't know. I just thought it was obvious. I figured you would pick it up. Like, how am I supposed to know that? So it's just interesting that the Gemara even bothers to record that conversation. Kind of funny. Okay, so what did we have today? We started with the Pagin and Dibure and the Kim Levi de Rabbi Mina exception to the rule. From there, we got to Mako b'shlosha b'slim b'shlosha. From there, we got to ibur hachodesh. Right, we saw the sources for it. We got to ibur hachodesh. What does ibur hachodesh mean? It definitely doesn't mean ibur. It either means kiddush or chishuv. And then kiddush broke up into 3 different possibilities. Which day they're mekadesh that you would have to do it in front of 3. And from there, we got to ibur shana, which is going to be our main topic for the next few days. Which I didn't even discuss what it is, but it's to intercalate the calendar, which is basically to say we're adding another month. Because we'll see, the seasons don't match up. We use a lunar calendar, but we have to make corrections for it every few years. And they would sit and decide it. And we're going to learn a lot of details about that over the course of the next few days. With that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom and Chanukah Sameach.